Hey guys, Brandon Kowallis here, Director of the Salt Lake Community College Concurrent Enrollment Program, and today in this episode, we're going to be talking about data and data collection. I'm going to share with you some things that we've learned over the years, and it has been a massive learning curve. I mean, if I rewind the clock and I go back, like 5 years back when I started here as a director, man, I was so clueless and sloppy and unstrategic when it came to data collection. But over the last year or so, I've been working on a certification that's called the Lean Six Sigma Black Belt certification. What this is, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Lean Six Sigma is basically something that a lot of manufacturing industries use in order to guide process improvement within their organization. But it's something that also applies to any non-manufacturing industry. And it's a very different way of looking at data for process improvement. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've learned through the Black Belt certification. I'm also going to go over some other lessons that I've learned over the years as we've reflected on data and process improvement and just what is good data, what is bad data, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to talk about that. I'm going to walk you through a process improvement project. And then I'll share with you some data dashboards that we use to sort of, to invite collaboration and improvement and innovation within our program. So hopefully that sounds exciting. It is to me. Hopefully it is to you. With that said, let's go ahead and jump through. I'm going to step over here to the whiteboard, and I'm going to walk through some of the things that I've learned, some insights I've gained when it comes to data collection over the last few years. So the first one is that if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Because a lot of times what happens is we have this new initiative or project and we throw it out there and then we're like, oh, it went so well because, people came up to me and said, good job, man, that was awesome. And then I had a parent call me and they said they really liked it and it felt so good, it felt so right. So it was really a success. But was it really? You really don't know until you collect data. So whenever you are trying to improve something or launch something and make it successful, that data needs to go hand in hand. You need to figure out beforehand, what data do I need in order to measure whether or not this really is successful? Because maybe everybody came to me and said, yay, you're awesome. And then I look at the data and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm awesome for 5 people who talked to me, and the other 95% or 99%, maybe it's like 1,000 people, didn't even bother to use the stinking tool that I developed. So if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Next one. Let questions drive you when it comes to data collection. If you don't have a question, then you are going to waste so much time gathering data, because I can go to my CE system, I can dump a report, and I can process that like 1,000 ways. But unless I know what do I want to learn, then I'm just going to be wasting tons and tons of time trying to figure out how to process the data, and I'm just going to be overwhelmed and confused and frustrated. I'm going to probably end up in a corner in the fetal position, crying and rocking back and forth. So let questions drive your data. Next, and this goes right along with the questions, but it's important to ask the best questions. Yes, there are good questions. Well, there are bad questions. There are good questions. There are better questions. And then there are the best questions. So for example, maybe a good question is, how are our enrollments doing? Are they up? Are they down? How much? That's a good question, but so what? They're down. Okay, is that a problem or is that not? They're up. Oh, great. Why does that matter? So the next question, maybe a better question, might be, why are our enrollments going up consistently over time or going down consistently? Maybe I'm going to dig in and see if I can figure out, why that is. But maybe the best question is, why do we even need enrollment data? If this is our goal over here to help students to transition, does it really matter right now at this point whether enrollments are up, whether they're stagnant, or whether they're going gradually down? Maybe it does a little bit, but maybe there are better questions that you can ask to help you gather data that will help you to achieve whatever goal it is you're after. So, for example, with our annual report, we put enrollment data in there, but it's not because that's something that we really need to achieve our goal. It's, the leadership of the college is interested in seeing that, but from a department perspective, yeah, sure, we want to see it go up, but there are more important things, more important questions that we want answered. The next one, avoid vanity metrics. Now, what are vanity metrics? A lot of times, we end up in this position with data where we try to collect data that just shows that we're awesome. It's that vanity thing. Like, I don't want people to see my imperfections. I don't want them to know that, things are not so peachy keen over here in our world. So I'm going to ask questions that will sort of skew our data, or I'm going to collect the data that kind of proves the point that I want to prove. So that's vanity metrics, but there's another side to vanity metrics. And vanity metrics are really about gathering the data that doesn't necessarily ultimately improve whatever it is you're trying to improve or achieve. So for example, maybe I measure enrollments, and that's interesting, and that's some vanity data that I can show and say, look, we're on the rise. But what really may matter is the conversion rate. So I measure the numbers that all these students are participating in concurrent enrollment, and not a single one of them ends up taking classes here on our campus and finishing a degree. So non-vanity metrics are metrics and data that helps us to improve overall the customer experience, so that ultimately they end up doing what it is we want them to do, whether that's from a business perspective, purchasing a product, or from an education perspective, maybe transitioning or completing and being successful, or whatever that is. So try to avoid vanity metrics and focus on metrics that help you to improve the student experience, your stakeholder and partner experience engaging with your program, and ultimately help you to achieve your goal. If they don't do that, then you don't want them. Next, data dashboards. Developing and creating data dashboards becomes, what I've found, has become critical when it comes to three things. And that is stimulating collaboration, stimulating accountability, and stimulating process improvement or innovation. Data dashboards are more than just, a lot of times when people hear like data dashboards, they think, oh, well, I'll have my enrollment dashboard over here and it will show me all this data we talked about before that is, virtually useless. So I show my enrollments over time. Look, they're going up, or oh, they're going down, or they're doing a little mountainy thing. That's nice, and that could be a data dashboard, but there are more meaningful ways to create data dashboards. One of the things that we've done, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over and show you our data dashboard. And the way that this is designed, it's not a global dashboard, although there are some global metrics on there. But one of the things you can think about when putting together a data dashboard is, how do I drive those things? Collaboration, accountability, and process improvement, or program improvement, or innovation, whatever you want to call it. The way that we've done that is focusing not just at the global level, but down to the individual level. And then every time we have a staff meeting, we will look at that data dashboard and it's like, oh, hey, well, look, why is John over here like not doing so great on the number of syllabi that need to be reviewed? What's going on, John? Because everybody else seems to be up. Can you tell us like, I've been running into this problem. It's like, this isn't about getting John in trouble. This is about identifying where there are problems. John's way down here, everybody else is up. What's everybody else doing and what's John doing? You're not in trouble, John. Just tell us like what's going on. He's like, oh, well, this was what's going on in my life. I sort of have dropped the ball for a few weeks. I've got a plan to get back on it now. And what happened there? What just happened there is John saw that everybody else was performing and he wasn't in the data and said, well, boy, I need to do something about it. I don't then have to have a conversation with him and sit down and say, well, John, I'm concerned about your performance. I don't have to do that because, it becomes evident to him right there, yeah, I'm slacking a little bit. And if I do ever have to have that conversation, I've got data to back it up. It's one thing to have a conversation and say, well, look, everybody's done, 100 reviews and you've done 3. that's a bit of a problem versus, I'm struggling with you right now, John. I'm struggling with what's going on, and I feel like you're not performing. Like, that doesn't go anywhere. So the more you can have data dashboards to drive individual improvement and collaboration and accountability, the better off you're going to be. Now, one thing that I'll say is that this can be a bit of a painful process. So when you launch a data dashboard that is that detailed and getting down to the nitty-gritty detail of how each person is performing, and by the way, you have to figure out in your own program, how do I measure what I'm doing, and how can I measure what everybody else is doing, and how can they measure what they're doing? So you got to figure that out. But when it comes to launching a data dashboard, there can be some real resistance and also offense when you launch that, because a lot of times the culture is like, ooh, they're pointing out my flaws. They're trying to show that these people are so much better than I am. And whenever you roll this out, I think it's important that it be very clear that that is not the intention. That when you roll out a data dashboard, you make it clear that what we're trying to do here is help one another to grow and improve. And if someone's doing phenomenal and everybody else is not, what are they doing? We want to know that, because, whatever they're doing is working really well. And if we can all do it, imagine what we can create together. So it's not about pointing out anybody's flaws. It's not about getting anyone in trouble. It's about helping us to all grow together. And the only way we're going to do that is if we can see and we can measure what exactly is going on, because otherwise we're just using gut feelings to try to improve things. And sometimes that works, but we can have greater success all the time or more frequently if we let data drive us. Okay, let me jump over and just show you really quick this dashboard so you get a sense of what it looks like. All right, so here we are now over in our data dashboard, and this is basically just in a SharePoint site. So if your organization uses Microsoft and has access to SharePoint, you can easily set up one of these SharePoint sites. And I'll just show you really quickly on the back end sort of how this works. So if I go into the Documents section and then into Dashboards, there's basically just a bunch of Excel sheets, and every week, so we have a plan here where this is updated weekly by yours truly, and the data comes from, and then it lists where the data comes from exactly. So it says who's updating it and when that needs to be updated. And this is basically just an Excel file. And then back here on the sort of the dashboard area, we take that data tables that we create in those sheets and we just paste them here so you can just sort of glance through at the data. So once a week, it's updated, usually the day before our staff meeting, and then we go through and we look at this. Now you'll notice that when you look at this data, so this is down to the, the individual level here. So we've got each individual when it comes to the academic plans that are being created, and it shows how many plans that they've created. So we can look at this on a weekly basis and say, wow, so why has Daniel here approved? So they're not just submitted, but he's reviewed them and he's approved 17, and everybody else is not doing so hot. Let's sit down and have a conversation and find out what's Daniel doing and what's going on here with everybody else. And it becomes a very friendly conversation. Nobody's in trouble. And like I said, again, it takes a while to overcome that culture of feeling picked on. But when you get through it, magic and great things happen. So scroll down, we've got the total academic planning appointments by advisor. This is dumped out of our scheduling software, so we can see who's doing the most visits and what are they doing that they're getting more visits, and so they can share with others. We've got total information sessions by advisors. So if you watch the advising video, you know that they go out and they do information sessions at the high schools. The total information session attendance. So not only do we have that, we want to find out how many people are attending. And we can break this down into individual schools, and there's all kinds of ways we can parse the data, but we try to figure out what's going to help us, what data is going to help us achieve what we want to achieve, and monitor that we are achieving that. So that's the advising dashboard. Then we've got a liaison dashboard. So this shows the total number of syllabi uploaded, reviewed, so we can make sure that we're staying in compliance with NACEP accreditation standards. And then we come down to the uploads by date. So this over time we can see when we send out an email, did it have an impact? Well, yeah, we had a whole bunch of people upload their syllabus at that time. Oh, great. Okay, but certain times a year we send out an email, we got nothing. Okay, well then let's not send emails out that time of year. Let's try to figure out when the best time is to send them to the instructors and then send them to the liaisons for reviewing those, so we can check that on a weekly basis. Professional development completion rates. Has everybody completed their professional development, or do we need to do some outreach and figure out maybe what's going on and encourage people to get that done? We have an annual agreement they have to sign that's done in MyCE, so we can check that to see if everybody's signed it, basically meaning they've logged in, they've used the system. The new instructor general concurrent enrollment training, whether that's been completed by all the new instructors. And total college experience evaluations completed. And again, you can see it's broken down by individuals. So if there's somebody who's falling a little or a lot behind, or one person that's way ahead of everybody else, we're going to have a conversation and find out what can we do to help one another to grow and improve. We got the college experience evaluations by date, so we can see if there are any trends going on. Because if we are, like midway through the year and we've only got like 50% done, then we need to make a big push and find out what's going on so we can improve that. And then we've got our registration dashboard, which can also be filtered in different ways right here. So we can look at that data differently to figure out who are all students registering themselves, how many are we manually registering, how do we identify ways to improve that. And then we got the total registrations by date. So those are the main, so that's all the data that we have decided to put on our data dashboard. As of now, we've got a lot of things in the works that we're looking at measuring, but if you take a look at this, probably a few months from now, it'll look vastly different because, things change, the program changes and improves, and we all get better. All right, so the next one, don't act without any data. A lot of times what will happen is we get this new project or initiative, we get super excited about it, we're like, I'm ready to launch, this is gonna be so exciting, everybody's gonna love it because I love it, and this is just gonna be wonderful. So let's just get it out there and rejoice. And so we do, and then after we're like, oh, well, why is nobody interested in this? Why is nobody using it? It doesn't seem to be catching hold as fast as I thought it would. Well, if you were to approach projects like that by first gathering some data, then your efforts are going to be much more strategic and more likely to be successful. An example is a while back we had pulled together some stakeholders after one of the NACEP conferences, and we came together and said, what do we want to work on over the next year? And they said, well, let's see if we can figure out ways to get more of the middle performers participating in concurrent enrollment. Those are the fence sitters that don't really know if college is right for them or not. How do we get more of them in there so they can have a successful experience and then they can end up in college? So we talked about it, and then we said, well, most of these students are probably coming from the low income, first gen, students. And so we started talking about that group. It's like, oh, well, I think that, the best way to communicate them are flyers and posters, and maybe we send something home with them, and we talk to the parents, and, we do all this stuff, and, this is kind of what they'll like, and, oh, and they use this tool over here, I think, and maybe we could tap into that. And we had this discussion, and then in the end we said, well, but do we know? Do we know that they use that they think that way, that they have these groups, that they have these methods of communication? Do we know that? And we're like, well, we think, we're pretty sure. Well, let's be sure before we move forward. So we decided to create a survey that basically would be delivered one-on-one through the high school folks with the parents and the students, where they'd sit down and ask them a series of questions to find out what are they using right now, not what would they use, but what tools of communication are they using? Are they involved in community groups? What do they like, what don't they like? What are some of the barriers they see when it comes to college? Let's sit down and identify those. So we came up with a survey, and unfortunately there ended up being some challenges with delivering that sort of a survey with some of the information we wanted in the high schools. And so ultimately we decided to abandon the project instead of just go out and take this shotgun approach and see if we could get something to stick, because we realized that without that data, that everything that we did would just be this shotgun approach of like, let's just shoot and we'll see if we can hit a target. Well, that requires a huge amount of energy and effort and commitment to everybody involved who's already got a lot on their plate. So ultimately we decided, there's no way for us to do this until we can gather that data, because once we know that they use this is what everybody is using for communication. Okay, now how do we tap into that? Until we know that parents of that group are involved in these 4 communities, how do we tap into that? If we don't know what they use and what resonates with them and what their beliefs are, then how are we going to be able to convince them that they are ready for college, and taking a chance could really result in some fantastic benefits? So until you gather good data, it's probably best to hold off on acting unless you are ready to just take a shotgun approach, invest a whole bunch of time and effort into something that you don't really know in the end will work. You might say, I feel like it might work, and you can do that. But in my opinion, if you can gather data beforehand and you can find out and answer some of these questions, you are going to be so much more successful and impactful in the work that you do, and it's going to require significantly less effort. So down the road, we may re-look at that, administering the survey, finding a different way to do that. But for now, everybody had a lot on their plate. We tabled it, and we'll eventually come back to it if we can figure out a way to get through some of the hurdles that we came into. So anyway, don't act without data. The final thing is, don't get stuck in big research projects. A lot of times we have this, this belief, because we're in higher education, that in order to do good research, you got to have this this massive data set, and you got to involve all these researchers in institutional research, and all these people and all these things, and it takes like a year. It's like this PhD project that you're thinking you're going to get involved in, and it just sucks like all of your time and energy doing this big research project, that during the time you worked on this research project, you probably could have massively improved your program, because process improvement is much less of a heavy weight than big research is. So my recommendation is not to not do big research, but to start with process improvement, because that's some very simple, easy data that you can gather that has a massive impact. Because you get big research, and from what I've observed, most of the research I've looked at, in the end, I read the article, and I'm like, oh, that was interesting. Well, interesting doesn't change my program in the next few weeks. Interesting maybe gets me thinking about some projects down the road that I could work on. Or, also with big research, a lot of times you do it, and then in the end you're like, and now I just have a lot more questions. Questions don't drive improvement in the timeline that you need to improve the program so that you can improve the student experience. Because just you think about it from a business perspective. If you improve the customer experience and deliver a high value add, you grow customers and you achieve your objective of selling more of your products. It's no different with process improvement. Whenever you do process improvement projects and gather process improvement data, you can make little improvements to your program that have a massive impact and a massive reach. And then down the road, when your program is totally streamlined and it's operating, and now where you used to spend 60 hours a week at your job, now you're only spending 30 hours to maintain it, or 20 or 10 hours to maintain your program. The rest of the time you can spend doing the big research and finding ways to add more value to your customers, instead of trying to figure out how do I make what I already have a better value add for the students. So anyway, as much as you can, try not to get bogged down in overwhelming yourself with big research. Do that when your program is operating so smoothly that you have plenty of time to dedicate to that as sort of a fun side project. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about process improvement projects and how do those work, and especially when it comes to data. So I'm going to go through beyond data, how you handle an entire process improvement project. Now within Lean Six Sigma, there's something called the DMAIC model for doing process improvement. I'm going to walk through each of those. So the first one of DMAIC, D, is define. Here in this phase, you're going to define the problem, because if you can't define the problem, there is no way you're going to be able to find a solution. And if everybody doesn't agree that that's a problem, then you're going to implement this solution. Everybody's going to stand there and dig their heels in the ground and go, oh, do a stupid project. So you need to define the scope of the problem, and you need to get everybody involved who's a stakeholder who's somehow going to be impacted by that to come together and say, well, yeah, I agree it's a problem. Or maybe they say, well, I don't think that's the problem. I think it's over here. And everybody's like, oh, yeah, definitely, that's the problem. So step one is define the problem. Step two is to create measures to figure out if the problem really is as big as you think it is. Because sometimes we define the problem, it's like, oh, it's horrible. I mean, there's this form that people fill out, and 90% of them are totally inaccurate, and then I got to do all this extra work. And so then you go ahead and you measure it, and it's like, oh, well, the problem is not that they're 90% are inaccurate. The problem is it's so painful to do one that you just feel overwhelmed by it, because the reality of the data is that we created this measure to say this is what we're going to measure in these forms for accuracy, so we can see which ones have errors. We're going to do every 10th form, and then you get them back, and it's like, out of 1,000, there were 2 that had errors on it, but you were really frustrated by those 2. So it's really not that big of a problem. On the other hand, maybe you measure it and it's like, wow, 500 out of 1,000 were bad. This is a problem, and we need to move on to the next phase. So the next phase in analyze is where you then look at the measures and say, well, we looked at the measures and obviously it's a problem. Okay, so now in the analyze, let's try to figure out here. So what exactly then is the root cause of this problem? Let's brainstorm some ideas. Well, this is the problem I think it has to do with this. These could all be probably the root causes of the problem. Okay, so we think those are the root causes. Let's now go ahead and create some potential solutions that we could test out and see. So, well, for this problem, we could do this and this and this. And for this problem, we could do this and this and this. And then you go out and you test them and say, okay, well, let's try this for root cause number 1. We try it, we rerun the data, and we're like, no improvement at all. Obviously, that's not the problem. Try the next one. Again, nothing, maybe a little bit. Then you do the third one, you're like, whoa, we went from 500 errors to 15. Wow, we need to implement that maybe down the road, but let's try the next one. You try the next one, it's like, no, whoa, dang, we went from 500 down to 2 errors. That's really good. So you run through, and then in the end you say, you know what, we've analyzed now, and we know this is the root problem, and here are the solutions. So the next step is to then implement your solutions. So you get them out there, you bring all the stakeholders together. This is what we found. This is what we're going to try to do. Let's launch this after we've tried the pilot, and we'll improve it. Now, it doesn't end there, because you've made an improvement, but how do you ensure that that sustains? And that is the fifth part of the DMAIC model, and that is control. So you now need to make sure that the changes that you have made out there stick. So then you go through and you figure out, here are the things that we need to do now in order to ensure that people don't just sort of fall back to old bad habits. And that's the control phase. Okay, so now that you understand maybe some important things to know about data, you understand process improvement, I'm going to walk you through one of our process improvement projects so you can see sort of what we did step by step to improve our syllabus review process. So let's go ahead and jump over now to the computer. Okay, so first we started by gathering a list of all of our stakeholders, basically anybody who is involved in any way with the syllabus review process, which were primarily the liaisons, both the college experience and content liaisons, also the concurrent enrollment office staff. We talked a little bit to some of the high school administrators who are involved in that, and we asked them questions to sort of ascertain the voice of the customer. What are the customers complaining about? What parts of the process are really bothering them? We categorized those, and then we wrote down, what are the measurable requirements? I mean, what does the customer expect with regards to this part of the process? They expect it to be done in 15 minutes or in 2 days or in a month, or they expect to receive an email reminder or whatever. So we put that information together. Next, we then did a high-level process map of all of our instructor processes. So we went through and we mapped out all of the processes from beginning to end, just, sort of to the best of our ability, the way that we understood them, just to give us a sense of how things flow and what are the different steps. After we did that, the next step was to process walk, and that's where you actually physically walk through each step of the process, and you take some notes about the observations. Now, you go through this process walk, you don't necessarily give them advice or suggestions. You're simply there as an observer. You may ask some clarifying questions so you can better understand the step, but you're not offering suggestions or improvements. But you may write some of those down to think about after the fact. Now you can see here, we go back to data dashboards. We had a data dashboard while we were doing the process walks to make sure that everybody was doing their process walks that they needed to do, and just kind of monitor how that was being done. Now we jump into the measure phase. So we defined the problem after we gathered all that information. We sort of said, here are the problem processes. Let's focus on a couple of these and see if we can make some improvement. So we next came up with a data collection plan. So what data then exactly do we need to gather in order to see how bad the problem is and to later down the road measure improvements? So we listed all of the different data types that we needed to gather as we went through this, part of the DMAIC process. MSA, that's a measurement system analysis. We didn't need that for this project, so that's kind of off the chart. That's basically where you just, you go back to the form with errors, like how are you going to define an error and how are you going to measure what fields are you going to measure and that sort of thing. So you're making sure that everybody understands the measurement system, and then you do an analysis to make sure that it's accurate and that everybody's collecting the same data the same way. We did not do that. Next, we gathered some baseline data so that we could, sort of get a sense of how long was it taking for syllabi to be reviewed, because that was ultimately what we were trying to improve. The syllabus review lead times, so the point from when the syllabus was uploaded until the point where it was reviewed. That was the primary focus for this project. Then we ran some more data just to see sort of what the average review time was, because we wanted to improve that so we could get feedback back to the instructors faster. And then we jumped into the analyze phase. So we realized it was definitely a problem. The review times were all over the place, and some of them went as long as like 6 months to review it, like way after the class was over. So in the analyze phase, then, we begin doing our root cause analysis. We start with a fishbone diagram and a 5 why chart. A fishbone is first where you identify sort of the stinky head of the fish. So here's the problem. The instructor and liaison work is not being adequately completed or tracked. And then you categorize potential root causes here in each different sort of section. So processes, people, systems, forms, and policies are some sort of main categories, main bones of the fish, and then you identify those root causes. We further took that to a 5 why analysis. So 5 why is where, it's like this annoying kid, why? So why is the work completed but not recorded? Well, it's because this. Okay, so why don't they know where to record or find it? Oh, because this. And you can keep going down to about 5 whys that helps you dig down to the root cause. From that point, we went back and we re-looked at the process map, and we started identifying, okay, well, here's the problem. Within our process map, there is no step to remind or prompt the instructor to complete tasks. There's no consequences, and then there are some other issues. So we need to build some additional processes or steps into our process map to ensure liaisons are getting reminders, that they're getting the information and resources they need so they remember how to do things that they only do once a year. After that, we did a hypothesis testing plan. So our hypothesis was that despite the lack of consequences, the infrequency of task performance, and the lack of clearly communicated deadlines, the syllabus review process cycle time medium is not acceptably long. Sort of the opposite of what we think it is. So we ran a test with our data, and we found out that we could reject the null hypothesis, and that the reality was that the lack of consequences, the infrequency of task performance, and the lack of clearly communicated deadlines was part of the reason, was the major reason why the review time was so long. Now, typically we would have just focused on one of these at a time, but because this process only happens once or twice a year, we didn't want to wait 3 years to test 3 different things. So we tested them all at once, which, I mean, for all we know, it was just a lack of consequences. If we had added consequences, maybe things would have changed. Maybe it was the infrequency. It could have been any of these or any 2 of them or all 3 of them. But because we didn't test them all separately, we don't really know that. But still, that was sort of what we had to do. Next, we move into our hypothesis test data. So there's some data, which I'm not going to go into that. This is some before and after testing. So you can see that the review times here, it's pretty widespread there, from 22 days up to 122 days. And then spring semester, that shrinks down, and we're getting close to, or we're not necessarily getting close, but we're making progress as we begin implementing some of those changes, because we hadn't fully implemented all of them yet here. So, but we can see that what we are doing is definitely having an impact. And here's another graph that shows this was sort of the range before, and here it is after. So in the number of days reviewed. Now we go into the improve phase. So we created this solution matrix, which basically you list the different solutions, then you score them, so it gives you an idea of which ones might be the best ones to implement. Lucky for us, I mean, they were all relatively easy to implement, didn't take a lot of time, didn't have like minimal impacts on the customer, so we were able to implement a lot of these at the same time. But this chart sort of helps you to identify if there are like several solutions and one of them is going to take like 10 years to do and like $100,000, then you'll save that one for later, or not at all. Next, we get down to the implementation plan. So we then took all of our tasks that we needed in order to implement our improvement, and we divvied those out in Microsoft Planner and assigned those, and then every week we would review them, see where they're at, and we'd check those off as we completed them to make sure that everything was completed. We had a weekly review meeting in order to make sure that was done. If you have more questions about the meeting format, remember we have another episode, I think, that we've done before this that talks about our meeting structure, and this will give you a sense of what a project planning meeting looks like. Next, we came up with a Fmea. This is not FEMA, this is not like the emergency team. Fmea is a failure modes and effects analysis. So this is where you basically look through and say, we've got this solution and we've implemented it. Now, what could potentially fail, so we can identify that and ensure that our solution sticks. So really, this is part of that control phase, filling out the risk management. And really what we decided to do ultimately was to create that shared calendar that sent us prompts, so we didn't have to remember like 1,000 different things, but the calendar would remind us to do certain things. Last of all, we went through, we redid the process map to reflect the reality and the new process, and did some final measurements to show that we did indeed improve. And so there's another measurement that we did. And then we jump into the control phase. Although I really sort of have, sometimes there's a little bit of overlap between some of these phases. So you can see back up here, I talked about the Fmea. So this is part of the control, but it's also sort of falls within the improvements. So it's sort of one of those in-betweenish sort of things. But in the control phase, we finally took our monitoring and response plan, we put that together. So how are we going to make sure that, that this all sticks and it stays in place? We talk about our data dashboard and monitoring and all that sort of stuff. And then we wrap it up and brought it to an end. And that is an overview, a real quick overview of this project that we did to improve our syllabus review times. Okay, now I said before you want to avoid vanity metrics. You really want to avoid vanity, period, right? But ultimately, after you've gone through all this work, I think it's really important and it's valuable to share with other people some of the work that you've been doing. Because it kind of gets them excited about some of the projects you've been working on. It gets them excited to see the improvement that's happened. And so one of the things that we make sure that we do every year is pull together a lot of this data into an annual report. So I'm going to show you now sort of quickly what our annual report looks like, and we'll walk you through sort of what we do with this annual report. So right here, this is the report. We actually just barely finished this up. It's it's July-ish right now. So we finished this up for the year. Once we finish this, this goes out to all of our high schools, it goes to the college administration, it goes to our staff, it goes to the academic administrators at the college, so they can all see the results of the work that they have been engaged in and that they have been a part of. So really, the annual report isn't necessarily a report, but it's a celebration of what we have all accomplished together. So to give you a sense of some of the things that we include in our annual report, I'm just going to scroll through this. And now this is something that, lucky for me, I've got InDesign skills and have a photography and graphic design background, so I threw this together myself. But I mean, you don't have to do anything fancy. You can just throw it together in a Word document. You can use a template in Word. You can use whatever software you want to throw this together. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You can spend as much or as little time as you want on this project. So first we give them sort of an overview of what is our purpose, because I mean, again, we need to be grounded in purpose in what we do. So this is to remind everybody, this is what we do, this is why we do it, this is what we're about. We include overall program stats because everybody just seems to want to know that information, so we include that. We've got quotes from students throughout here that we grab from our student course evaluations, where we ask them about how concurrent enrollment has made a difference in their life. So we use those quotes here in order to make this more than just a report, but more of a story. We get into some just general gender, ethnicity statistics. We look at some action steps. So these are basically what we have planned to do next year based on what we've done this year and some of the things we've gathered and learned from our data. Coming down, we then have an action steps report. So we had action steps during 2019-20 that we developed during 2018-19. This is a report of what those steps were and where we have made progress on them. So everybody can see what together we have achieved and where we still need to do a little bit of work. Next, we get down into the enrollment report. Again, like I said before, I mean, this is interesting and it's nice to see, but this isn't really the data that's most important to us, but it is important to a lot of folks out there in the high schools and here at the college, and so we include this data. But we break it down in ways that it's most useful for those that we send this to, and also, we sort of do this to, invite a little bit of competition. Because if I scroll down here, so first of all, let me come back up. We've got the overall program information growth and the number of unique students participating. You can see by district, and this is where the competition comes in. So people at different districts are able to see what other districts are doing, and they can look and say, oh, why is Jordan up here? I mean, we're better than Jordan. We need to really make some pushes this year so we can get way up there and we can beat out Jordan. So hopefully this gets a little friendly competition going, but also breaks down to the high school level. So I'm going to go past the race and ethnicity. We got some information and trends over time because our executive cabinet is interested in that. And then we got the district enrollment report. So here's the Canyons district and here is each high school. So even within the districts, they can look at those, each high school at their principal meetings and say, oh man, look, why am I like lower than this other school? Like, come on guys, we need to get in gear here. Let's see if we can grow the program a little more. So this hopefully spurs a little bit of friendly competition. And then I'm gonna scroll down, and we're not gonna go over this last part because I just went over it with you. So let's scroll down to our process improvement. So here is sort of a report on the process improvement that I just showed you for the syllabus review, but we also looked at several other processes. And this goes through what we did and tells the story of our process improvement and who all was involved and what amazing things we have accomplished together. And that is our annual report. Okay, so hopefully that's got the juices flowing for you. Hopefully that's given you some ideas of some different ways that you can maybe approach data outside of ways that maybe you've thought about. So hopefully this is useful. Hopefully it's got you really thinking, and hopefully it's kind of opened your mind to integrating some of the things that business and industry does into what you do within your program when it comes to improving your program, improving your processes. All right, again, as always, remember that nothing is impossible. None of this is impossible if you think outside the boxes that have been built around you. If you are resourceful and find ways to make it happen, even if you don't have the time or the money or the influences or whatever resources, but that you are resourceful. And last of all, that you have the courage to act.